Hi everyone, my name is Megan and I am recording myself for the first time, so I apologize in advance. I've tried to make this as professional as humanly possible, but I may have failed, so please bear with me. I'm going to do my very best to explain the super fascinating childcare subsidy. It is a pretty complex topic and one that I'd say even people who've worked in the sector for a very, very long time struggle with from time to time. So if you don't understand the childcare subsidy, please rest assured that you are not Robinson Crusoe. Hopefully, this presentation will clear a few things up. Obviously, I'm not an expert, but I know a few things, and I'm hopeful that that'll be helpful to families. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about eligibility criteria for the CCS. We're going to talk about individual CCS entitlements, how they're calculated, and I guess some commonly encountered errors. We're also going to take families through their transaction statement on Owna and explain what all the different numbers and colours and line entries mean. And then we're going to talk about some frequently asked questions that we get from families. So bear with us as we start this super interesting. We're now going to talk about CCS eligibility. There are a number of requirements in order to be eligible for the childcare subsidy, but I'm going to just touch on the ones that are most frequently encountered. The first is that you are a resident in Australia, so either a citizen holding a permanent visa, on a partner or temporary protection visa. There are some exceptions that can apply, so if you think you might be eligible, we've included in the slide deck a link that you can check out to find out more information. The other requirement is that your child is fully immunised. This is also a requirement in New South Wales for all long day care services. So even if one was happy to forego the childcare subsidy, it's not possible to attend a long day care service in New South Wales if your child is not fully immunised. And finally, the childcare subsidy is for children aged 6 years or younger, not attending primary school or on a break and about to return to primary school. And this is in relation to a long day care setting. So it is also possible to claim the childcare subsidy in relation to before and after school care. We're just talking about long day care settings here. One thing I wanted to talk to as well was who controls what. So Futuro is a long day care approved provider, and we use a system called Owna to manage our enrolments. And essentially, once a parent has applied for the childcare subsidy, the government will assess that application and use its formula to determine what families are eligible for in terms of their subsidy rate and the number of CCS subsidised hours per fortnight that they're eligible for based on their activity hours. And we're going to get into that in a minute. Once that determination has been made, that information is provided to the approved provider. We connect the CCS in Owna for that child's account, and essentially Owna and the government talk to each other, and I guess your child's CCS entitlements are automatically credited towards your child's account. There is a period of 1 to 2 weeks when you first start care, while it can take a bit of time for that credit to apply. And so we actually use an estimate of your child's CCS entitlements, so that you're only responsible for paying the gap fee while we're waiting for funds to actually be received from the government. Once your child's CCS account is linked in Owna, All we do is we just submit your child's attendances or absences whenever they're attending or not attending the centre, and that information is automatically uploaded to the government, and then the government transfer the funds to the operator, and so parents only have to pay that gap. Okay, your entitlements. There are a number of factors that are taken into consideration by the government in determining what your CCS entitlements are going to be. So when you apply for CCS the first time, they will ask you to provide quite a lot of information, including information in relation to your combined family income. So if there are two parents in your family, they will be asking for the income for both parents. And it is important to know that it is possible to hop in and update your income if it changes throughout the course of the financial year. And I recommend that you do so if there's any variability in your income, because at the end of the financial year, and once you've filed your tax returns, the government will reconcile your declared income with what was on your tax return. And it is possible that you may end up with a CCS adjustment at the end of that process. So income, very important. The other factor that's taken into consideration is the number of children attending care. They recently introduced higher subsidy rates for second, third, fourth, subsequent children. So typically, if you've got more than one child enrolled in care, you'll see that the older child attracts a lower subsidy rate, and your younger children, second, third, fourth, whatever, will attract a higher subsidy rate. The other information they'll take into account is your family's activity level. And this is the number of hours that the family is engaged in employment, self-employment, whether they're on leave, paid or unpaid, unpaid work in the family business, unpaid work experience or internships, actively setting up a new business, studying, training, looking for work, volunteering. It's quite a broad definition of activity. And then that activity level determines the number of subsidized hours that you will receive every fortnight. And I'll explain that in more detail later. And finally, they'll be looking at the type of care that your child is going to be attending. So there are different CCS rates that apply for long daycare services, family daycare services, before and after school care, etc. So those are the things that the government is going to be looking at when they're determining your entitlements. And then once they've made their determination, you will receive a percentage subsidy rate. So, anywhere from 0 to 95%. And you will also receive the number of hours per fortnight that your child will be subsidized to attend care. And I'm going to explain again in more detail what that means later on in this presentation. And I've just included a note there in relation to making sure you keep Services Australia in the loop in relation to your combined family income. The next slide is a not very pretty, but hopefully useful graph that shows the correlation between your subsidy rate and your combined family income level. Broadly, the more money you earn, the lower your childcare subsidy rate will be. And it's indexed. So every financial year, the government will adjust the combined family income brackets so that they account for inflation. You can see there the higher subsidy rate that applies to second, third, fourth, etc. children. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. I'm going to talk on this slide about the number of subsidised hours per fortnight that a family is entitled to. The table that you see on the slide here sets out the number of hours that a family is entitled to claim the childcare subsidy for, and how those hours correlate with your reported hours of activity. So I should note that this will change in due course. So from the 1st of January 2026, the 3-day guarantee comes into effect, which will mean that all families are entitled to at least 72 hours per fortnight of CCS subsidised care, which is a great outcome. It is also important to note that currently children that are attending preschool in a long daycare setting may be eligible for at least 36 hours per fortnight, again, regardless of the amount of activity that's been reported. Here we're talking about session lengths. So the childcare subsidy is calculated on an hourly rate rather than a daily rate, which is counterintuitive because almost all services charge per day rather than per hour. However, this is how the CCS is calculated, which means that the session that your child attends care is going to be relevant. And when I take you through the calculations, you'll understand why. It is also particularly relevant if your child doesn't have enough CCS approved hours per fortnight to cover the number of days that they're attending care. You can see your child's session length on Owna. However, if you have any doubts and you're not sure, please feel free to chat to one of our lovely ACMs. The other information on this slide is the CCS hourly cap. So I just mentioned that the CCS is paid on an hourly basis, and this is where that becomes particularly relevant. So the government has fixed a dollar amount that it will subsidise up to nationally. And it varies by reference to the type of care that your child attends. So if they're attending centre-based daycare, also known as long day care, the CCS hourly cap rate is going to be $14.63 from the 7th of July 2025, and that amount is indexed every financial year. You'll see there that there are different hourly caps for different kinds of care, and that is because the government has calculated the cost difference in terms of the cost of actually providing care varies significantly by reference to the type of care that the child is attending. All right, everyone, now we're going to get stuck into the exciting part, and that is a worked example of how the CCS is calculated. So we've set out in this slide an example, with the emphasis on the word example. So we've got 2 children here. There's Blue Ivy and Rumi. So Blue Ivy is your older child, Rumi is your younger child, and they're both attending care 2 days per week on a 10-hour session. Blue Ivy is getting a CCS subsidy rate of 76%, and Rumi is getting a CCS subsidy rate of 91%. The daily rate for the centre is $172 a day. And all of these numbers are using 2025, 2026 CCS rates. And all of these calculations are also per fortnight because that's how the CCS is calculated. It's the easiest way to explain it. So if you have a look at your first column here, you'll see the total fees for care, which is $172 per day by 2 days of care, and then times by 2 to get the total fees for the fortnight. The column here shows you the number of hours that have been attended by each child per fortnight, which is 40, because there's 4 days they're attending in the fortnight on 10-hour sessions, and the session length can be variable, but just for the purpose of this example, we're using 10 hours. The hours attended compared to CCS approved hours, this column shows you the variance between the 36 hours per fortnight, pardon me, to which the children are entitled in this example, compared with the number of hours they're actually attending per fortnight. So they're attending 4 extra hours per fortnight than they are entitled to the CCS for. The next column here shows you the hourly rate for care. So that is the services hourly rate based on the session length that the child is attending. So it's $172 per day divided by 10 hours of care per day. The column here, hourly CCS cap, is $14.63. So this is the hourly cap that's set by the government, and it applies to all services across the country, regardless of where they are or regardless of what their fee is. So it's doesn't go quite as far in capital cities like Sydney, but it can go a lot further in other parts of Australia. And that is the hourly cap that is indexed every financial year. So the rate that you see there is the rate that applies from the 7th of July 2025, with the 7th of July being the first Monday of the CCS fortnight in the coming financial year. The hourly gap is $2.57. So that's the difference between the hourly fee that the service is charging and the hourly CCS cap set by the government. And then this column here shows you the gap per fortnight, which is the hourly gap, your $2.57, by the 36-hour entitlement, plus the extra 4 hours of care at the full rate of $17.20 per hour. The next column here shows us the child's CCS entitlements per fortnight. So that is your CCS percentage. So for Blue Ivy, it was 76%, and for Rumi, it was 91%. And you times that by the total fees, so $688, but you take away the gap per week to which the CCS doesn't apply, so that $161.32. The next thing to note is the 5% withholding column. So the government retains at least 5% of your CCS entitlements every fortnight to offset against any over declaration of activity levels or under declaration of income. So once you file your tax return, they will reconcile the information in your tax return with your declared activity and your declared income. And if there's any difference, they'll use that 5% withholding to pay any debt that you might owe, or you may end up getting some money back from the government, which is always nice. Families can also nominate a higher retention rate with Centrelink. So if you've got variability in your income from one month to the next, it's not a bad idea to nominate a 10% withholding if you don't love the idea of getting a bill from the ATO at the end of the financial year. So you take out your 5% withholding, and this is the amount that you have left. That is your CCS entitlement. And then the cost payable by the family per fortnight is simply the difference between the fees that have been charged and what your CCS entitlements are for that child. I also want to take a moment to talk everyone through some common errors. And when I say common, very, very common, because it is complicated to calculate these things. And, when a family receives their CCS subsidy rate, what often happens is they'll say, well, the fees are $688 a fortnight, but I'm entitled to 76%. So why isn't it just 76% of $688? So hopefully you now understand why it's necessary to do all those other things first. So we have to account for any gap between the services hourly rate and the CCS hourly rate. You have to account for the 5% withholding, and you have to account for the number of subsidised hours that the child is entitled to per fortnight. Another common error that we see is forgetting to account for the number of hours that your child is entitled to under the CCS. So in this instance, Blue Ivy is entitled to 36 hours per fortnight, but she's attending 4 10-hour sessions. So there's that variation in terms of the 36 hours and the 40 hours. So what we can't do is apply the CCS subsidy rate to 40 hours of care. It needs to be applied to 36 hours of care. Another common error that we see is that not accounting for that hourly gap. So the difference between the hourly rate that the service charges and the CCS hourly cap. In this example, it's a gap of $2.57, and that over the course of a 10-hour day adds up to $25.70. The CCS hourly cap it's a difficult thing to get right. In a perfect world, you would have an CCS hourly cap that accounts for the fact that it's much higher daily rates in capital cities that are a function of the fact that real estate prices are higher and rent is higher and development costs are higher in places like Sydney. However, there's obviously a lot of complexity involved in calculating things like that, and so the government has a single number that it applies across the entirety of the country. And finally, the other error that we often see is forgetting to account for the 5% withholding. It's not super well advertised, so I would say that it's one that most families aren't aware of. However, it does throw your calculations off and can be infuriating when you're looking at your number and you're looking at the number that you're getting back and you're like, we're so close, why are we not quite there? Often that's the 5% or higher withholding that has been taken out of the CCS entitlement. So next, what this looks like in Owna. This is a slightly ugly representation of a transaction statement in Owna. But what I wanted to do was just color code and pull out some of the key elements. So you can access these things on your app. You can also access it on the desktop. This is a screenshot from the desktop, which I think is slightly more elegant, certainly more informative, I think, than what you might see on the app, but it's much for muchness. You can generate a transaction report for any period that you like. This example uses a 2-week period, and then you go get transaction statements. Obviously here we've redacted the name of this particular child for this example. In the top row, you'll see highlighted in red any balances carried over from the previous period. And then this box in grey shows you the attendances in that particular week. So the 9th of June to the 15th of June, this particular child attended 1 session of care, and that grey box there shows you the full daily rate. So that is the daily rate for care, what I referred to previously as the headline rate. That's here. Here you've got a green line that says CCS subsidy paid, and that box there, that represents the CCS subsidy that's been paid by the government for that child's session of care. And there's another green box over here which shows you additional funding that's been received by this particular child in the form of the 3-year-old Start Strong funding, which is not the subject of this particular presentation, but it's there. And then I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we apply an estimate of families' CCS entitlements for the week to come so that we can reduce families' out-of-pocket costs. And you'll see there it says CCS estimate for the week starting the 16th of June. It's got the number there in green with a little arrow. And once that child has attended the sessions in that week and Owna has in the background reconciled any changes in the child's CCS entitlements that may have happened during that week, it may be the case that you get an adjustment as a result of that calculation process. Here's some screenshots of how you can see family transactions on the app. I put in there a little note that there can be a bit of a lag when you first commence care while the CCS is received, and that amount is reconciled against the estimate that's been used. We at Futuro, we engage Owna's accounts team to manage all of our family's CCS and billing. Owna is a great platform, can be a little bit complex to navigate from time to time, and the Owna team knows their own platform inside out. So that's the rationale for engaging Owna accounts to do this process for us. Does mean that if you have a question in relation to your account or entitlements, while of course you're always welcome to ask one of our ACMs or our centre managers for help, probably the fastest, easiest way to get an answer is going to be to log a ticket on the help desk, which you can do on your app. Frequently asked questions. Absences is a question we get a lot, understandably, because children can be sick fairly often. Children are eligible for 42 absences per financial year, to which the Child Care Subsidy will apply. Any more than that, and the Child Care Subsidy won't apply to those days unless you can apply for additional subsidised absence days. There are some circumstances that apply to that, and I've listed them there. Most often it's related to sickness. However, it is important to note that if you want to claim additional absence days, it's necessary to have a medical certificate that's been provided contemporaneously for the absences that have been recorded previously, if that makes any sense. The absence count as well, it applies to the child, not to the parent. So it's not the case that if you've got two parents and one child, you have double the number of absences, unfortunately. The ACCS is the additional childcare subsidy, which is more generous than the childcare subsidy. However, there are some hoops that have to be jumped through in order to get it. And I've listed there some of the circumstances in which the ACCS will apply to a child who might be vulnerable or at risk of harm, abuse, or neglect would be eligible for the ACCS. Families that are experiencing temporary financial hardship also fall into this category. Families that are transitioning from certain kinds of income support payments to work, or children that are being cared for by an eligible grandparent who is on an income support payment. It is important to note in relation to temporary financial hardship that the definition is not that easy to meet. So it's necessary for that temporary financial hardship to have been caused by an event that happened in the last 6 months, and it has to have substantially reduced the ability to pay childcare fees. Some examples that have been provided are a parent losing their job, not resigning, but being terminated from their employment, a major disaster, so like a bushfire or a flood, the death of a partner or a child, or a primary caregiver being involved in a domestic and family violence. So definitely possible. There are some hoops to jump through. That's the situation with the ACCS. And finally, preschool entitlements. So preschool programs can be run in both a long daycare setting and in a preschool setting. Both programs have to follow the national curriculum, which is the Early Years Learning Framework. If a child is attending a preschool program, they will be eligible for at least 36 hours of care per fortnight. Although this provision obviously will become slightly redundant on the 1st of January 2026 with the introduction of the 3-day guarantee. I've put some information in there in relation to the school commencement provisions that apply in New South Wales. This is a box that parents can tick in their app. My child is of school age. It is important to note, though, that one just needs to be very careful about nominating a future date for enrolling in formal schooling versus ticking that your child is school aged, because if you are attending a long daycare service and you tick the box that your child is of school age, it will actually affect the CCS hourly rate that applies to your child's care, even though they're attending a long daycare service. And it can be very, very difficult to unpick that particular arrangement. So just be cautious about that one. And finally, we put in some additional resources on the slide deck. There is a lot out there, but hopefully this information is helpful. However, you're always very welcome to reach out to us with any questions. We'll always do our best to answer them to the best of our ability. And hopefully you found this information helpful. Thank you.